Start our study with our usual prayer for student and teacher. Om Sahana Bhavatu, Sahano Bhurtu, Sahaviryam Karavavahai, Tejasvinavaditam Mastoma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great vigor and energy. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So we're picking up our study of the Katha Upanishad. And just to remind you of where we have been, we were studying a section that is the fourth section of Katha Upanishad. In the second portion, if you remember, we decided together through reasoning that the ultimate truth about things is not in the relative world, but in the realm of an absolute. The problem is the absolute is intangible. You can't reach it, you can't lick it, you can't smell it. But the senses can smell, the senses can see, the senses can hear, touch and taste. All of these things are available where we discover the outside world. And there's a convenient arrangement whereby all the objects of the senses are correspondingly picked up by the sense organs, but these aren't standard sense organs because other creatures have different capacities. An owl, for example, can see at night. We can't do it. We haven't got access to infrared, ultraviolet, or supersonic or subsonic. So we are constitutionally limited. And our reading of the world, therefore, will be individual to our own species. And so when we want to find out what is the absolute truth, arriving at which we will solve all our worldly problems, coming under one heading of grief, or coming under the heading of despondency or sorrow, then it wouldn't make sense to deal with the world as is presented through the senses. Some other formula has to be applied. And so this ultimate entity within us and within everything else, but we start off within us, has to be arranged in a different way. We have to take our stream of consciousness, which is our birthright, that flows through the sense organs, and find a way of making it poised. At that poised moment, all our sorrow goes. So the practical application to what we generally call spirituality. There's a reason why we do it. If we're doing it from regulations or superstition, we should drop it. Because there is a reason why a structure is made, something like a scaffolding when you build a building. But once the building is complete, the scaffolding has no more use. It might be good to construct a reliable scaffolding, but it will be entirely individual. My scaffolding will be different from yours. You have to find your own structure. But that should lead you internally. And when you investigate internally and find that essence of individuality, you will also have found it universally present everywhere. It has to be. Because if it's true, it must be true everywhere. It must be true in an unconstrained way. And truth has that characteristic that it cannot change. It must be an absolute. It must be universally true everywhere. And then the next thing that this chapter discussed was, what happens if we don't understand this essential truth? Well, then the cycle that we're experiencing everywhere in the whole of nature, namely birth, life, and death, will simply continue its round until we find a way of getting out of it. Something like a hamster on a wheel, not knowing how do I get off. Or a bird that is trapped, and its entrance is also its exit, but it doesn't know it. So knowledge has to be there. And the knowledge, firstly, of a principle, and then how do you reconcile the practical application in your daily life? How do you rally the emotions around to catch up with it? And then the next topic that was dealt with was that what we view as the ultimate and absolute is also the eternal Lord of religion, of personal experience, the culmination of devotion. And this abides in oneself. All the great teachers don't say, look for it outside. They may indicate that as a temporary indication, a kind of shadow. Look at the shadow first, then find the other thing beyond it. Something like pointing out to a child, where is the moon? Where is the moon? No, I can't see it, I can't see it. All right, you see the tree? Yes, I see the tree. You see the silhouette of the branch? I see it. You see the small twig on the left-hand side? I see it. Ah, beyond it is the moon. Yes. So there are indicators that lead you progressively toward the truth. When you find it, you'll find it to be a universal experience. And what will be the results? The result will be of seeing variety and unity. The opposite would be seeing fragments that we have to deal with. And these fragments give us a fragmented state of mind as well, a kind of scatteredness. Then what is the way? Now today is Swami Sharananda's birthday, Titi Puja really. And so it might be good to see what some of his teachings are, where we picked up some ideas that might be practically useful to us. One must have faith, he says, in the enlightened souls and carry on religious practices accordingly. It's like any other science. We look at a credible authority somewhere. Just to remind you, if you're studying physics, well, don't go to a second-hand bookshop with second-hand information, with a second-hand author. Go to the highest authority, maybe Cambridge University, or go to a well-known personality, Stephen Hawking perhaps, or some famous physicist, and learn from that. In the same way, those who claim, I have seen the truth, I have experienced the truth, and in their own life exhibited it. As we know, Swami Sharananda was a disciple of the 19th century mystics, Sri Ramakrishna. You can see how he describes some events. One event he describes as the master dancing, spreading joy everywhere. On the 1st of January, we celebrated what was called Kalpatru Day, where Ramakrishna, despite his illness, demonstrates a glorious dimension, a joyous dimension, a transforming dimension, whereby his presence, his touch, everything has a transformational effect everywhere. Despite the fact that he was physically in a state of, recovery, or they thought it was recovery. He seemed to rally around on that day, and something like a transfiguration took place. Naturally, those who witnessed will say, here's a credible authority, because his behavior is not like any other ordinary person. And this transformation by a touch, how could such a thing take place? Always in a state of joy, always spreading joy everywhere. Never a frown, never a downward movement of the mouth, never a reaction like that. Something like a light shedding its light equally to everyone without any discrimination, whether somebody's good, whether somebody's bad, whether somebody believes, disbelieves, whether religious, atheistic, agnostic, it makes no difference. Spread it equally everywhere on the basis of a universality of experience. Such great ones exist, such great teachers, such great saints exist. We can learn from them and we have to have faith in them, but it's not blind faith. It's faith based on an observation. And if that observed person also teaches against logic, we won't listen. There's a logic that is supplied. These Upanishads are giving us as a supply of well thought out logical structures, but also go at the same time deeper into the possibility of empirical understanding. He says, otherwise, it leads nowhere trying to understand the pros and cons of their teachings through our impure minds, occupied as they are with thoughts of the world. What do we mean by thoughts of the world? We have the world around us. Is it wrong to think of things in the world? Not at all. But we have to have a revalued experience of it. We have to look at it in a different way, a way which is different from what the senses simply supply. We have to look deeper than that, because the sense organs and their objects are made from exactly the same material. Today's eyes and ears and skin and molecules are all made from yesterday's, I was going to say sadsa, but nobody will understand that. But anyway, yesterday's porridge or yesterday's food anyway, yesterday's bananas. He says, occupied as they are with thoughts of the world, and then to carry them out in practice. What that means is, if our relationship with the world is that the world is an exaggerated entity, if it is huge, then anything else will be small. If the inner reality is big, the world will be commensurately small. He says, hence, give up the attempt for understanding everything and start your spiritual practices by relying on what the Master, that is Ramakrishna, has taught. When you sit down, he says, for meditation, then he gives us a practical thing. First, think thus: it is my own chosen deity. How does this relate to the Katha Upanishad? Isn't the Katha Upanishad all about the Atman? Isn't it about the immortal self? Isn't it about that Brahman? But you see, if we read this fourth section carefully, we'll find mention of several things. We'll see that the enjoyer or the observer is that entity on the microcosmic level. We call this Brahman. We can't think of that directly. We can experience it directly, ultimately, but it doesn't mitigate against what is called samashti, that is the expressed being that comes from it. Now we have to understand the structure, which is non-contradictory. But yesterday, we were talking with a small group. There was some feedback from one of the talks I gave. Some people attended. They no longer attend. Why? Because this person here mentioned God multiple times. Yes, because no teaching, even the teaching of the Absolute, denies this aspect of it, but it is an aspect of it. It is not an extra cosmic creator entity. If that's what you mean by God, then we are probably atheistic about it. But if you say that this entity, that for some is interpreted as an extra cosmic creator God, away from us, foreign to us, maybe we'll meet one day in a post-mortem heaven. If you lead your life, then the prize is you'll get something in the post-mortem condition. And to attract people toward that, this post-mortem paradise is described in glorious terms. Terms where we exaggerate the sense pleasures. For example, supposing you're living in desert conditions and the great relief in oasis, then how will you visualize this incentive for post-mortem condition to lead a good life? You might think of it as abundance of water, abundance of fountains, all the things you won't find in a desert. You'll find an abundance of dates, you'll find an abundance of fruits, you'll find abundance of perfumes. You find abundance of different flora and fauna. All of these not found in the desert, but could be found in a glorious eternal oasis. That might be a reasonable starting point, but we can't stick with it. We have to evolve from there, because all it's doing is it's pushing the senses external. All it's doing is saying, we validate this existence and we'll validate a more glorious one also. And yet, we can't ignore the manifested aspect of it. This manifested aspect of it is an expressed being that we call a personal God. And this personal God is couched in the language of Swami Purnananda as a chosen deity, a chosen aspect, something that psychologically we can get on with, something like emotionally we can be attuned to, something that puts us in a certain position and a certain relationship. Is this all just imaginary? No. It's actually a real thing, but it is manifested. How can we grasp such a concept? We can use the example of an ocean. The ocean is not separate from the wave. But if we have a small, minutiae view of things, a small section, something that gives us a limitation we find difficult to expand because of the sense organs and our experience and our commensurate memories that are aligned to it. And that's all we take for granted. And then having to struggle in the world, naturally, we will have to make sure that we are satisfied by the things that the world provides. Wealth, obviously, pleasures of various kinds, things that the senses are looking for, as it were. So to invert that and take all that energy that's going outward and redirect it to a loving entity, a personal God, is not contradicting the purport of the Upanishads that tell us of Brahman or tell us of the Atman. And so the Katha Upanishad is telling us in this section that this samashti, expressed version of this Brahman, when you add space and time and causation and function and all of that, that is really an entity that we can do as a creative mind, a cosmic mind. When we identify with it and say I, really saying I, cosmic mind. This takes away much theological confusion. When Jesus says I am the way, he's not saying I'm the way, the only way. He's saying I in cosmic mind, that is I the word, the logos, the nous, the cosmic mind. That is your personal God. And then, of course, there's Vyashti, that is the microcosmic version that we call soul or jiva. But all of it is the same thing manifested. So if we have a myopic view of things and only understand a beginning of a wave in an ocean, or a rise of a wave in an ocean, or the crest of the crest of the crest of a wave in the ocean, and view other waves as our enemy, or other waves as our collaborator, that are useful for sustaining our life of a wave. If we view other waves in this way and have a view that we either have to fight against them, you see, when two waves clash, they annihilate each other. But one wave could support another also. The hollow will support another wave, an extension of it. But if you look at all these waves, individually, collectively, they all have a beginning, they all have a lifespan, they all have a peak, an apex, they all have a demise, but it's only temporary because another wave is there. And the causation means that the peak of a wave causes the hollow of the next, and the hollow of that wave causes the peak of the next. And so it goes on perpetually. But the ignorant thing is that you didn't look deeper, because when you look deeper, the ocean itself is there. And there's no difference between the ocean and the wave. The wave is just a manifested form, whipped up by the wind and other forces and currents. And below that, a vast, infinite storehouse is there, if you will, this vast ocean that is existent. Now, this is just an example. This is just an analogy. It's a useful analogy. So we don't separate these things. Only our myopic view of things is making the separation. The fragmented is the mind itself. Mind is like a telescope. It's an instrument, no doubt. Technical term from the yogi point of view, the yogis will call it antakarana. That is an internal instrument. If it's instrumental, then we can use it like a telescope. We can look at the stars through this telescope. We can look at the telescope itself. We can look at the mind. We also look away from it. We're not bound to it. And this, when we look away from it, we're able to recall, dream, waking, sleep. That is the enjoyer, and that is the witness. That is the fundamental Atman. The real knower knows both these things, both the manifested aspect of it and the absolute aspect of it. Not just one or the other. And if you take the one and strip away the divinity of it, this is called worldliness. If you add divinity to it, this is called a spiritual dimension, a spiritual view of things. If you add the concept, the understanding of at depth there is the ocean, then have a look, how does it manifest? You won't see any difference between the wave and the ocean. Suppose a water falls over a great waterfall. Let's take Niagara Falls. It comes from Lake Erie. It would be foolish to say that the water analyzed in Lake Erie, the water that is analyzed in Niagara Falls, or the water in Lake Michigan is all different. It's the same water. Chemically, 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. You can't make any separation. You can't say Lake Erie's water is different or special. It's all the same, but manifested in different forms, displaying in different forms, flowing in different forms. And then, if you recall, this wonderful word, aditi. Aditi, really in this context means this creative womb of things, this golden origin of a seed that manifests its variety everywhere else. And so just continuing Swami Sharananda's teachings. So it is my own chosen deity who, like an externally pure and indivisible ocean of existence, knowledge, and bliss, pervades everywhere. And I also exist within him. So that the fundamental practice is to see that in all beings and see all beings within that. This is repeated countless times in these Upanishads. And countless times it's repeated again in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. But there it's personalized. He who sees me in all beings in me. Isha Upanishad says the same thing. Every Upanishad says the same thing. Then if this is existence, knowledge, and bliss, what does that mean? Since we cannot identify this pure Brahman or the ocean itself, because we're stuck on the wave perception, then let us examine the nature of the substance itself, the water itself. And so one thing we can never deny is that we are existent. We are always existent. We always have that feeling, I exist. You can't get away from it. So existence is a fundamental thing, not a property. It's an actuality. Knowledge itself is an actuality. We apply it in its manifested form by saying, I know this, I know X, Y, and Z. But knowledge itself, or consciousness itself, is not a property of anything in this context. And then bliss manifests in so many different ways. When we find it, we are blissful. Now everybody's looking for bliss. They're couching it in different language. They're looking for happiness. They're looking for some relief from sadness or difficulties or problems. It's all right. This search itself is an indicator that our nature is like that. You can put it in this way. We want to get back to our fundamental existence. We want to get to our fundamental consciousness, the one that knows everything. And we want to get back to our fundamental nature, which is blissful. He says it is he who exists everywhere, inside and outside myself. You can think of it like a pot. The air is inside it, outside it also. You can't say, today will it be outside, tomorrow will it be inside. It's both. Thinking on this idea for a while, start your japa, that means your spiritual practice, as taught by teachers or an individual teacher, that is a guru, and meditation as usual. This will remove the unsteadiness of the mind. We ignore sometimes these practical suggestions, directions, and a few years later say, but tell me, how can I meditate? Tell me how can I get to this feeling of reality? Well, there's only a simple formula, repeated endlessly. So employ all the recommendations and teachings of these great teachers. And if the mind continues to be unsteady, he says, then pray to this personal Lord, indicated as a manifested version of this Brahman in the Katha Upanishad. Lord, kindly make my mind steady. When you do that, know this for certain, that he hears whatever you say and knows whatever passes in your mind. So this Katha Upanishad is not denying any aspect of this religion or practical spiritual pursuit. It's not denying the process of bhakti. It's simply laying out the facts that there's a manifested version and that there's an unmanifested version. And both really are the same thing. So let us now, having caught up with it, find out a little bit more. Let us deal actually with this term aditi. So we can leave it there. So you see, there's no denial about anything. So we use the ancient texts which register a motherly aspect. Aditi, Aditya, is the mother of all the other things that come from it. Unfortunately translated as gods. Is all these shining, illuminating things, factors throughout the universe, what we call universe in its subtle form, that manifests ultimately into a crystallized gross version that we call our world. So it's very appropriate to use these old concepts that might have been misinterpreted in a literal way and bring it into the philosophical realm and say, no, in this context, this is the creatrix, this is the cosmic mind from which all things are created. Now then, having caught up, we see that the last parts of this, and we glossed through it last time, are all to do with meditation. As I pointed out previously, the Upanishads give us wonderful principles, logically presented, factually presented. Secondly, they say, all right, we can present this because the subject is very subtle. Let us present it in multiple different ways. If you didn't catch it in this way, there's another way, and another way, and another way, because the subject is very subtle. And so there are, from these verses, let us say from 9 onwards, or we can say from 11 really to 13, which ends this section, is all to do with meditation. Let's just review what it did have to say before we come to this part 2, which we'll pick up today. 11 says, this, that is, this subtle entity, this universal entity that we discover on an individual basis first and find its universality as we investigate it and as it's revealed, is to be attained. How? Through the mind. There's no other way to attain it. It's to be attained through the mind. We have to revise all our habitual thinking. Our problem is psychological. Our remedy is psychological. This is to be attained through the mind. There is no diversity whatsoever. He who sees as though there is difference here goes from death to death. As soon as you see the fragmented version of what is presented, then you'll continue. And there's no end to it. Is it all bad news? No. Because this continuous effort to get out of this cycle of birth and death and rebirth and so on, this effort itself is an indication of a desire for freedom. And the universe presents itself as a kind of university giving us unlimited opportunities to pass our exams. You didn't pass it here, you pass it somewhere else. Don't take it as fatalism. Try your best to pass it here. But be consoled. If you don't get it here, you'll get it next life, or next life, or next life. In some way, you'll get it. Before attaining the knowledge of unity, says the commentator, idam, this Brahman, which is homogeneous, aptavyam, is to be attained as identical with the self. What do we mean by self? This is not the psychophysical self. This is the self at depth. This is the ocean. The ocean registered here in its manifested form of individuality. And what is it? Is to be attained through the mind, which is purified. How do we purify it? Purified by the teacher and the scriptures. This is exactly compatible with what we've read from Swami Purnananda. What do we mean by scriptures? These Upanishads are the scriptures. Anything that does two things, tells you the great possibility of your self-discovery, and secondly, how you should do it, giving you a practical manual, a step-by-step, something like even plainer than instructions you get from IKEA. Actually, in IKEA, there should be a few bolts left over and you have no idea where they fit it in because you didn't follow the instructions. Never mind. And since ignorance that presents diversity ceases on this attainment, because with knowledge, ignorance vanishes. The antidote to ignorance is knowledge. If it does it here in the Brahman, then this Nana, this diversity, kimchana, even so little, nasti, does not exist. On the other hand, he who does not give up his vision of ignorance, you have to let go, have a let go attitude. Many people want to hold on to it, you see. If you are prepared to let the whole thing go, then if you don't want to give up this vision of ignorance that is comparable to darkness. Why did you say vision of ignorance? Because it is a presented thing. It is an appearance. It's not an actuality. I know it looks like actual. This table looks and feels hard. Your eyes look as if they're working properly, and the world around you is familiar. You can't deny its reality, yes, but it's relative to all the senses. When you take one of the senses away, it becomes different. You take sight away, and you're left with all the other senses. Maybe you're reliant on somebody who is fully sighted to say, oh no, the identification of what you're feeling is this. The famous story of the blind men or the blind people with the elephant is widely known in Buddhism and Hinduism alike, and now widely in popular culture. The subtlety of the story, though, is not fully understood. So let us see, okay. Being a story, I suppose we have to begin once upon a time. there were, let's say, 6. We can make it 4. We can say any number you like. It really doesn't matter. We can say it's 5, really, because 5 senses are there. So 5 blind men come to investigate a creature. A knowing person knows it's an elephant because they can see the sum totality of it. They're fully sighted. Unfortunately, the blind people can only rely on the sensation of touch. As we know, one touches the leg and feels around and feels the dimension of it and thinks and states, oh, it's a pillar. Another one, the trunk. Oh, it's a hose pipe. Another one, the tusk. Oh, it's a sword. Another one, the ear. Oh, it's a plantain leaf. Another one, the tail. Oh, it's a rope. Of course, none of these are true, but they cannot see the totality. Now, supposing you're able to see the totality of the elephant, an addition to the story would have to be like this. 2 things are being seen, not the one. It is a relative totality. Because how will you identify an elephant? It has to be contrasted with something beyond it. You draw a dot on a board. 2 things is what you see. You'll see the dot, but you'll see the whiteboard beyond it. When you see the whiteboard, you'll see the room beyond it. When you see the room, you'll see the house beyond it. When you see the house, you'll see the city beyond it. When you see the city, well, you'll see the country beyond it. And all of that, you'll see the globe beyond it. And beyond that, you'll see the solar system. And beyond that, you'll see the galaxy. And beyond that, you'll see the group of galaxies. And beyond that, you'll see space. And beyond that, you'll see the expansion of the universe. And so it goes on. There'll always be something. So the real totality is a sense of pure existence, with then the registration of what the expressed totality looks like. And the whole thing becomes a totality, just as when we discover the ocean, we have discovered the totality of everything, including the waves. So, as though there is diversity, it goes on to say, he does indeed go from death to death, even by superimposing the slightest difference. This is the idea. And the Upanishad again speaks of that Brahman which is being discussed. So it goes on to tell us the being, the Purusha, the pure entity going on like that. So it's told here. Eka vashi sarva bhutanta atman ekam bijam bahudha yaha karoti tam atmastam yenupashyati dirash tesham sukham shashvatam litarasham. That one, that is the inner controller, controlling the self. That being that is there, residing of the size of a thumb. The expression really, or the inference, the being, we can interpret as what is called technically Purusha. Purusha, literally a person or self, that internal self. Atman also means self. But Purusha is a curiously technical term. It's derived from 2 things, Puri and Purna. Puri is a city. So we can think of this entity of the size of a thumb. Is it really of the size of a thumb? No. But we meditate on it at the size of a thumb. Where? Where is it located? It's located inside the body. We can say in the very depth of the body. That being, the size of a thumb, resides in the body, knowing him as the ruler of what? Of all the expressed things. When you view a wave, it came from somewhere. It's going somewhere, past and future. One does not want, by virtue of that knowledge, to save the self. This is that. Nothing to save. The ocean doesn't wish to be saved from itself. Now we can advance, because we covered the other passages, to this part 2 and see the connection of it. So it begins like this. The commentator said, as Brahman, that is this ocean, this unmanifest entity, is difficult to know, yes, because it's unseen. It's like the fetus hidden by the womb. It's like the fire hidden by smoke. In fact, it's mentioned how fire comes from two sticks. And these are two sticks that, for ceremonial purposes, ritualistic purposes, are described as the upper and lower. Rubbing the upper and lower, fire comes. That is fire, why fire is acknowledged, and why many of the mantras and verses in the Vedas are there dedicated to Agni, fire. A magical thing that arrives out of friction must be contained somehow potentially in the sticks. So this is something that is hidden and can be manifested or remain hidden. So Brahman is difficult to know. So the next passage will be, and the next theme will be, this is a fresh commencement for ascertaining in another way the reality that it is. In other words, as I mentioned previously, being a subtle subject, the Upanishads will present it from this side, from that side. If you didn't grasp it from a conventional side, let's try and shake up your thinking. Look at things from a different point of view. Try to revalue things, shift things. You know, I always say on the courses that I give, Enneagram, the last one, forthcoming one is workshop on meditation. And I say, I don't care if you agree with me or not, but if you can shake up the mind and think differently, then I've done my job. Work it out for yourself, but at least shift the mind from an unconventional point of view. Conventional point of view is to see this world as the senses present it. Unconventional way of looking at it is to see a deeper dimension of it. There are processes that will see material deeper dimension of it. Modern science will be one. Then investigate something that is beyond our range. James Webb, a satellite, or I should say, a telescope, has been launched. It aims to see further than the previous giant, the Hubble telescope, to reach into an area that the eyes cannot ordinarily see, or even a sophisticated instrument cannot probe, doesn't go deep enough. In order to go deep enough, we have to screen out all the obstructions, all the things that might be interfering with our vision. The Earth's atmosphere interferes with our probing into space. It might even interfere with the radio waves we're picking up. There was a declared discovery not so long ago, a few years ago. They were very excited. And they said, we have discovered gravitational waves. And this was a whole project that was based in the Arctic, where interference is supposed to be less. Made a vast and bold declaration that excited the whole scientific community. And said, okay, we have now proved not only Einstein's understanding of general relativity and found gravitational waves, but we found the gravitational waves that prove there was a vast, big explosion way back 13.7 billion years ago, say. And the effect of that, we should trace it, we should verify it, absolutely confirm it. There's no other conclusive proof except finding this. Very excited, the whole scientific community became very excited. And then embarrassingly, they had to retract what they had said. It's actually interference we picked up. So it's very, very difficult to screen out all the possible interferences when you try and trace things. Same thing in spiritual life. Difficult to remove all the obstacles, all the things that are interfering with our spiritual life, our probing, our investigation into the inner world. It's really difficult. Yet we have to carefully, systematically, patiently do it. And what are we doing? We're purifying, we're clarifying, just as we're purifying and screening out the interference in the atmosphere. In the same way, we're screening out all the interference signals in the mind, all the various diversions, cleaning the mind. Purifying the mind is what it is. And if we can't grasp it in the one way, we have to grasp it in a different way. So science is also doing this, but it has its limitations because it's still investigating what is the appearance of things. And it all has to be relayed to the sense organs ultimately. It all has to be interpreted there. We can't see in the infrared, but the infrared is presented to us in such a way the eyes can catch it. All the various, for example, the discovery of the Higgs boson. We never saw a Higgs boson. Nobody ever saw a Higgs boson. They saw the effect of it, a blip that was verified, sufficient to say, this effect we expect within this range of criteria. Therefore, we can declare it conclusively with what is called 5 sigma certainty. That means statistically, the possibility of it being wrong is very, very small. All right, that's fine. But to go deeper than that, please. So we can go in the microcosmic way, we can go in the macrocosmic way, but it all has to come back to the sense organs. That's the difficulty. And so what is therefore behind it? These gives us clues about the subtlety of it. So supposing now we have a different way of evaluating things. Supposing we can understand from where we are, and the most familiar thing to us is the human body. So let us take this human body and see how it is evaluated properly. This passage is echoed in the Bhagavad Gita. It's a well-known passage. Puram ekadasha dwaram ajasya vakra chetasaha anushtaya na shochati vimuktasya vimukchate etad vetat. And as you see the familiarity continuing this theme, etat, vetat, this is that. What is it that we're looking for? Well, this is that. Whatever it is, this is that. So Puram Ekadasha Dwaram, there is an 11-gated city. Bhagavad Gita calls it 9-gated city. So belonging to who? Belonging to that one that is unborn, Ajasya. Of the unborn one whose consciousness is unflickering. Remember, previously described Purusha of the size of a thumb. Now we can increase our imagination. It's something like a light. When you light a lamp, it flickers. But this one, the consciousness, which is represented as a light of knowledge, is unflickering, doesn't move, it's steady. Whose consciousness is unflickering. There is a city with 11 gates. What are the 11 gates? We have to use our imagination. 7 in the head. So these are the eyes, ears, 2 gateways. These are the ways in which these are the entrance gates. What do we know about the world? We have to use these entrance gates. So 2 eyes are there, 2 ears are there, 2 nostrils are there, and mouth is there. All right. But then there's the royal entrance, Brahmarandra, that the yogis identify. This is the top of the head. The royal entrance is there. Somebody who knows this, the royal exit will be there as well. And then there's the navel, birth, the life birth. Anybody who knows yoga exercise will know that by doing what we call tummy pumping, that area, with dhyana bandha and so on, we get enormous energy because your whole physical life is centered around that. Your whole energetic life is there. It's centered around the samana, prana, that is that which equalizes things by regulating digestion, assimilation, and so on. So that navel is important. It's also a royal entrance. It's where you entered into the world. The umbilicus was there, attached. And all the important things that go on in terms of this city, now we've just revalued. Instead of saying my body, instead of saying me, instead of saying even this body, with the inference it belongs to me, an owner, and the I and the city being confused. This is clearly say, no, this is a city that belongs to something. And like any other structure, is made from parts. You analyze what is a city, what is its lifeblood. Immediately you think of highways and byways, roads. You think of buildings. You think of administrators in different sections, district councils, regulation of traffic. It's a wonderful thing to think of the body in this way. But then what does it belong to? Who does it belong to? It belongs to that one owner. And then what are the other 11, the other gates making up 11? Organ of procreation is there, organ of evacuation is there. Every city has a waste disposal unit. Every city has a way of regenerating electricity. Every city has, at its local area, individual waste collection. Every Monday here, the waste gets collected for recycling or any other thing. This factory is going on in the human body as well. But without that ruler sitting inside, nothing functions. It's a kind of internal supervisor looking at things, not necessarily directing things in a direct way, but by virtue of its presence, things work. Meditating on him, therefore, one becomes free. Question, how do we become free? Meditate on that one, size of a thumb, whose consciousness is unflickering, who is unborn. Everything else is born, but this one is unborn. And this one is steady. Everything is changing and unsteady. This is steady. So this not only gives you a principle for revaluing things that are familiar to us, but also giving us a deep insight and a practical method for meditation. Meditating on him, one does not grieve. We all want to be happy. No one wants to grieve. Everyone has difficulties and problems because that's what life presents. It's meant to be like that. It's meant to be a cycle of birth, life, and death. As soon as we get immersed in that, our sorrow is there. And from time to time, we get moments of elevation. And from time to time, we get moments of despondency. Knowing that, let us move toward the moments of elation, increasing it habitually more and more and more, until our whole mind becomes purified and illumined. And we become free because at the moment we are prisoners. We may not think we are prisoners. We may not know we are prisoners. But nobody selected the restrictions that are imposed on the human body. Nobody deliberately selected everybody has a wish to fly, without wings even. But unfortunately, we have to wait. If we want to do that biologically, we have to wait for thousands and thousands and thousands of years of evolution. But we can short circuit it. We can take charge. Using our capacity to be free, we can use our human brain and develop aircraft and go above the clouds like greater than any bird. We can do it. So we have to take measures toward our freedom, and everybody wants to be free. It expresses itself by a wish for social freedom, gender freedom, domestic freedom, all kinds of freedoms. That's our central search. Well, if you want to be free, free from what? Free from the sorrow that goes with it. So we'll pick up this passage again next week. And just to remind you, this is Swami Sharananda's birthday. It's worth reading his life and his teachings to make us, keep us in tune with one of these great teachers. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace unto all.